After 30 years of marriage, my wife hid me at a corporate gala, calling me embarrassing. But when the new CEO arrived, she ignored my wife completely and walked straight toward me. That was the moment everything changed. My wife dragged me to the corporate gala to impress the new owner. "Stay in the back. You're embarrassing," she hissed. When the billionaire CEO arrived, she ignored my wife's handshake. She walked straight to me, took my hands, and whispered with tears in her eyes, "I've been looking for you for 30 years. I still love you." My wife dropped her glass. "I'm Lucas Wright, 56 years old, and let me tell you something. I should have seen this coming." Patricia had been acting strange all week, and in 25 years of marriage, she'd never once wanted me at her fancy lawyer parties. Hell, most of the time she acted like I didn't exist. But that Tuesday morning, everything changed. I'm in the kitchen making her coffee. Yeah, that's my life now. And she looks up from her newspaper with this weird expression. "You're coming with me tonight," she says. Not asking, just telling me like she always does. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. "Come where?" "The corporate gala downtown. Some big-shot CEO bought out Morrison Legal, and I need to make connections." She went back to reading like the conversation was over. Look, I'm not stupid. I knew her law practice was in trouble. You hear things when you live in the same house for 25 years. Late-night phone calls about missing clients, arguments with her business partners, bills piling up. Patricia Wright was desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. "You sure you want me there?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. "I mean, it's been years since I went to one of your work things." She gave me that look. You know the one, like I was some kind of burden she had to drag around. Find something decent to wear. Buy something if you have to. Just don't embarrass me. Don't embarrass me. Man, if I had $1 for every time she said that over the years, I could have retired by now. Don't embarrass me at the country club. Don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. Don't embarrass me by existing. Here's what you need to understand about my situation. I wasn't always like this. 26 years ago, I was different. Had my own construction business, made decent money, called my own shots. But Patricia had other plans. See, she came from money. Not rich, but comfortable. And she had this idea about what a lawyer's husband should be like. Slowly, bit by bit, she took control. Started small, suggesting I dress differently, act differently at her work events. Then it got bigger. Why did I need my own business when her law practice was taking off? Wouldn't it be better if I handled things at home so she could focus on her career? Before I knew it, I was living on a $200 monthly allowance like some kind of teenager. 25 years of marriage, and I had to ask permission to buy a candy bar. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to that Tuesday. I spent the next few days hunting through thrift stores with my pathetic budget. Found a navy suit at a consignment shop for $65. The guy behind the counter said it came from some fancy store originally, probably cost 10 times what I paid for it. I pressed it real careful and hung it in the back of my closet, trying not to think about how Patricia would find fault with it anyway. The night of the gala comes around, and Patricia emerges from her dressing room looking like $1,000,000. Black dress, probably cost more than I spent on clothes all year. Her silver hair was perfect, and she was wearing her grandmother's diamond watch, the one that reminded everyone she had class, even when her bank account said otherwise. She takes one look at me, and her face drops. "That's what you're wearing?" I looked down at my suit. Honestly, I thought it looked pretty good. It was the best I could find with what you gave me. She shook her head like I was hopeless. "It'll have to do. Just stay out of the way tonight, okay? These are important people." Important people. Right. The kind who measure success by the size of their stock portfolio and the zip code of their vacation home. The ride downtown was pure torture. Classical music on the radio, her choice, always her choice. She's checking her phone every 2 minutes, probably rehearsing her networking pitch. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there like a piece of luggage she forgot to leave at home. I kept touching this old watch on my wrist without thinking about it. It was the only thing I owned that Patricia hadn't bought me or approved of. Belonged to my dad, passed it down when he died. I'd worn it every day for 30 years, usually kept it hidden under my sleeve where she couldn't comment on how cheap it looked. The Grand Hyatt was everything you'd expect. Fancy as hell, full of people who think they're better than everyone else. Crystal chandeliers, white flowers everywhere, waiters in, bow ties carrying champagne that probably cost more per glass than my monthly allowance. "Stay here," Patricia ordered, pointing to a spot near the bar where some big plants would hide me from view. "I need to work the room. Don't wander off." And there I was, standing in the shadows like some kind of servant, watching my wife of 25 years pretend I didn't exist while she worked her magic on potential clients. I grabbed a glass of water, couldn't afford anything else anyway, and watched the show. Lawyers everywhere, all talking too loud, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, playing that game rich people play where they try to one-up each other without being obvious about it. Patricia was across the room, talking to a group of women in expensive dresses. I could see the desperation in her body language even from where I stood. She was trying too hard, smiling too wide, gesticulating like her life depended on it. Which, knowing the state of her practice, it probably did. That's when everything changed. The room went quiet, like someone had turned down the volume on the whole place. Heads started turning toward the entrance, and I stretched my neck to see what was causing the commotion. That's when I saw her. Tall woman in a perfectly tailored business suit, dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples. She moved through the crowd like she owned the place, which, as it turned out, she pretty much did. Even from across the room, something about her seemed familiar, like a memory trying to surface. "That's Julia Hartwell," someone whispered nearby, "the new CEO who bought out Morrison Legal." Julia. The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. It couldn't be. After 30 years, it couldn't possibly be her. But as she turned slightly, scanning the crowd with those dark eyes I knew better than my own reflection, I knew with absolute certainty that it was. Julia Hartwell. The woman I'd loved more than life itself when I was 22 years old. The woman I'd planned to marry before everything went to hell. The woman I'd been forced to walk away from, leaving my heart buried in that college town where we'd dreamed about our future together. She looked different now. Older, obviously, but distinguished in a way that spoke of real success and power. But it was definitely her. Same strong jawline, same intense eyes, same way of tilting her head slightly when she was thinking about something. My Julia. Except she wasn't mine anymore, hadn't been for 3 decades. I pressed myself further into the shadows, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. What were the odds? What were the damn odds that she'd be the new CEO Patricia was so desperate to impress? Across the room, I watched Patricia spot Julia and immediately start pushing through the crowd like a shark smelling blood in the water. My wife had that fake smile plastered on her face, the one she used when she was desperate to make a sale. Her hand was already extended for a business, handshake before she even reached Julia. But here's the thing. Julia wasn't paying attention to Patricia at all. She was scanning the crowd like she was looking for someone specific. And then, God help me, her eyes found mine. Time stopped. I'm not being dramatic here. It literally felt like everything in that ballroom froze except for me and her. Julia's face went completely white, and I saw her lips part in shock. For just a second, the powerful CEO mask slipped away, and she looked exactly like she did when we were 25 years old and thought we had the whole world figured out. Then she started walking. Not toward Patricia, who was still trying to get her attention, but straight toward me. Didn't matter that there were 100 other people in that room. She walked through that crowd like I was the only person who existed. Patricia kept talking to empty air for a few seconds before she realized Julia had basically blown her off. I watched my wife's confusion turn into panic as she followed Julia's line of sight and realized where she was headed. "Excuse me," Julia said to Patricia without even looking at her. Her voice was different now, deeper, more confident, but it still made my knees weak after all these years. "I need to speak with your husband." Your husband. Like I was some kind of possession instead of a person. Which, let's be honest, is exactly how Patricia had treated me for the past 25 years. Patricia started sputtering something about Julia making a mistake, about me being nobody important. But Julia wasn't listening. She walked right up to where I stood in the shadows, stopped just close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive and classy. Nothing like the vanilla body spray she used to wear back in college. "Lucas," she said, and hearing my name on her lips after 30 years almost brought me to my knees. "Julia," I managed to whisper back. My voice came out all scratchy, like I hadn't used it in years. And then she did something that shocked the hell out of me. She reached out and took both my hands in hers, right there in front of everyone. Her hands were warm and steady, and I noticed she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. That little detail hit me harder than it should have. "I've been looking for you for 30 years, she said, loud enough that half the room could hear. Her eyes were getting wet, and when she spoke again, her words carried across that silent ballroom like a bomb going off. "I still love you." The sound of Patricia's champagne glass hitting the marble floor was like a gunshot. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this whole thing started way back in college. Julia and I met at Colorado State when we were both juniors. I was studying business on a partial scholarship, working 3 jobs just to keep my head above water. She was pre-law, brilliant as hell, and came from the kind of family that had money going back generations. Rich girls weren't supposed to notice guys like me. I knew that. She knew that. But something clicked between us anyway. Our first real conversation happened in the library during finals week. I was camped out at a table with about 15 textbooks, probably looking like death warmed over from pulling all-nighters. She walked over with this coffee and a sandwich. "You look like you could use some real food," she said with this smile that could have powered the whole campus. "There's a diner down the street that stays open late. Best pie in town." I looked up from my business law textbook, ready to politely tell her I couldn't afford late-night dinners. But when I met those dark eyes, something inside me just shifted. "I can't afford diners," I said, being honest because I was too tired to lie. "I didn't ask if you could afford it," she replied. "I asked if you were hungry." That was Julia. Direct, honest, cutting right through the BS to get to the heart of things. We became inseparable after that night. She'd drag me to her world of cocktail parties and country club events, but she'd also slip away from those fancy gatherings to hang out in my tiny dorm room, sharing pizza and talking about our dreams until sunrise. The night she proposed, yeah, she proposed to me, was perfect in its simplicity. We were sitting by the campus lake, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Julia pulled out this simple silver band, and her hands were shaking when she slipped it onto my finger. "Marry me, Lucas," she said, and I swear her voice was thick with emotion. "I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." I said yes, without thinking twice. We were 22, and stupid enough to believe that love could conquer anything. Made all these plans. Small wedding after graduation, honeymoon in Europe, the apartment we'd share while she finished law school. Everything seemed possible when you were 22 and in love. But Julia's parents had different ideas about their daughter's future. Margaret and William Hartwell were old Denver money, the Faupinoi kind of people who thought marriages should be business mergers instead of love stories. When they found out about our engagement, they didn't just disapprove. They declared war. The threats came fast and brutal. Cut Julia off completely. No more tuition, no trust fund, no place in the family law firm they'd spent generations building. But that wasn't the worst part. They threatened to destroy my scholarship, my future, everything I'd worked for since I was 16 years old. Margaret Hartwell had connections everywhere, including the university. One phone call from her, and I'd lose everything. "This is insane," Julia said when she told me about their ultimatum. We were in her apartment, and her face was white with fury. "I'll fight them. I'll give up the money, the firm, all of it. We'll make our own way." But I was already scared. Not just scared, terrified. These people had the kind of power I'd never even imagined. They could crush me like a bug and not even think twice about it. So I made the stupidest decision of my life. I broke up with Julia without telling her the truth about her parents' threats. I gave her back her ring and walked away from the best thing that ever happened to me. Told her we were too different, that I didn't want the life she was offering. Watched her heart break in real time and nearly crumbled myself. But I held firm. Better to let her think I'd stopped loving her than to drag her down with me. 3 months later, I married Patricia. She was safe, predictable, nothing like Julia in any way that mattered. I thought I could learn to love her. Thought that security might be enough to build a life on. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. So there we were, standing in that fancy ballroom with Julia holding my hands and half of Denver's legal community staring at us like we were some kind of reality TV show. Patricia's champagne glass was in pieces on the marble floor, and my wife looked like she'd been slapped across the face. "This is ridiculous," Patricia finally managed to say, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. She stepped between Julia and me, her face red with humiliation and rage. "Lucas, what the hell is going on here?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How do you explain 30 years of buried feelings to a room full of strangers? How do you tell your wife that she was never anything more than second place, a safe harbor after the storm of losing the only woman you ever really loved? Julia's eyes never left my face. "Could we speak privately?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, but it carried that unmistakable authority you get when you're used to people doing what you say. Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Privately? He's my husband. Anything you have to say to him, you can say in front of me." "No," Julia said simply. "I can't." The weight of Julia's stare was almost unbearable. I could see everything there. The questions, the hurt that 30 years hadn't healed, and, underneath it all, the love that had somehow survived 3 decades of separation. But I could also see Patricia's panic, the way her hands were shaking as she realized her carefully orchestrated evening was falling apart. "Julia," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't. Not here. Not like this." She nodded, understanding in a way Patricia never had. "Of course. But Lucas..." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, white with silver lettering. "Please, call me. We need to talk." I took the card with trembling fingers. When our hands brushed for just that split second, it was like getting hit with an electrical current. A reminder of what it felt like to be touched with love instead of ownership. "We're leaving," Patricia announced, loud enough for the whole room to hear. She grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "Now." Julia's face darkened when she saw Patricia's grip on me. For a moment, I thought she might step in. But I shook my head, slightly, and she backed off, her jaw clenched with obvious effort. I'll be waiting for your call, she said quietly. The ride home was pure hell. Patricia screamed at me for 20 minutes straight, calling me every name in the book, demanding to know who Julia was and what was going on. But honestly, I barely heard her. My mind was back in that college town, remembering what it felt like to be young and fearless and desperately in love. 3 days later, I finally worked up the courage to call Julia. Hartwell Industries, Ms. Hartwell's office. A professional voice answered. "This is Lucas Wright," I said, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. "Ms. Hartwell asked me to call." "Of course, Mr. Wright. She's been expecting your call. Please hold." The wait felt like forever. Then Julia's voice came through the line like a warm embrace. "Lucas, thank you for calling." "I almost didn't," I admitted, surprising myself with my honesty. "I'm glad you did. Can you meet me for coffee? Somewhere we can talk without interruption." I knew what she meant. Somewhere Patricia wouldn't find us and cause another scene. We met at this little cafe on 16th Street, the kind of place where nobody paid attention to anyone else's business. Julia was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table where the afternoon light caught the silver in her hair just right. "You look good," she said when I sat down across from her. "You look successful," I replied, deflecting because I didn't know how to handle compliments anymore. "Success isn't the same thing as happiness, Lucas. I learned that the hard way." We ordered coffee, black for her, cream and sugar for me, just like the old days, and then sat there for a minute, 30 years of unspoken words hanging between us like a wall. "Why did you leave?" she finally asked. The real reason, not that story about us wanting different things. I never believed that for a second. I'd practiced this conversation in my head for 3 days, trying to find the right words. But sitting across from her, seeing the pain that was still there in her dark eyes after all this time, I found myself telling her everything. About her parents' threats. About how they'd promised to destroy my scholarship and my future if I didn't walk away. About how scared I was of their power and what they could do to both of us. About marrying Patricia because I was tired of being alone with my grief. Julia listened without interrupting, her face getting paler with each revelation. When I finished, she sat in stunned silence for a long moment. "My parents threatened you," she said finally, her voice deadly quiet. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "Jesus Christ, Lucas." She ran both hands through her hair, a gesture I remembered from when she was overwhelmed. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me with this?" "Because I was 22 and terrified," I said. "Because your parents convinced me that loving you would destroy both of us. Because I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Julia's laugh was bitter. "You protected me by breaking my heart and disappearing from my life. You protected me by letting me believe for 30 years that I wasn't good enough to keep you." The pain in her voice was unbearable. I reached across the table without thinking, covering her clenched fist with my hand. "Julia, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing." She turned her hand palm up, capturing my fingers in hers. "My parents died 5 years ago," she said quietly. "I spent the last 15 years of their lives trying to earn their approval, trying to prove I could build something without their help. I never knew about the threats, never knew what they did to you." "It doesn't matter now," I said, though we both knew that was a lie. "It matters to me," Julia said firmly. "It matters because I need you to know that I never stopped looking for you. Not when you left. Not when you married Patricia. Not when I married Richard because my parents insisted I needed a suitable husband for appearances." My heart clenched. "You're married. Divorced. 3 years now. Amicable. No kids. No real love lost on either side. We both knew we'd married for the wrong reasons." She paused. "I hired investigators, Lucas. For years I followed leads that went nowhere. I never gave up hope that someday I'd find you again. That's when she told me the truth that changed everything. Patricia had known. My wife had known about Julia's search for years, had been actively sabotaging it, paying off investigators to feed them false information, using her legal connections to make sure every trail went cold. What happens now? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Julia's hand tightened around mine. That depends on you. I know you're married. I know this is complicated. But Lucas, what we had was real, and I don't think it ever really died. She was right, and we both knew it. Sitting across from Julia in that little cafe, I could feel the pull between us as strongly as I had when we were 22. But I wasn't 22 anymore. I was 56, married to a woman who saw me as property, and scared as hell about what would happen if I tried to change anything. Patricia will never give me a divorce, I said quietly. Not willingly. She sees me as an investment, not a person, and she needs me to maintain her image, especially now when her practice is struggling. Then don't ask her permission, Julia said simply. Leave her. Come work for me. I'll make sure you're protected financially and legally. The job offer hung in the air between us like a lifeline, and a challenge rolled into one. A chance to have my own income, my own purpose, my own life. But it also meant war with Patricia, and Patricia Wright didn't lose without a fight. I need time to think, I said. Julia nodded. Take all the time you need. But Lucas... She pulled out another business card, this one with her personal cell number written on the back. Don't disappear on me again. Whatever you decide, don't just vanish. I can't go through that twice. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept Julia's business cards in my shirt pocket, right over my heart, and they felt like they were burning through the fabric. Patricia was waiting for me in the kitchen when I walked through the door. One look at her face told me she'd spent the last 3 hours working herself into a rage. Where have you been? She demanded. I went for coffee, I said, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. Coffee? For 3 hours? Her voice was sharp with suspicion. With who, Lucas? With her. There was no point lying. Yes, with Julia. We needed to talk. About what? About your pathetic little college romance? About how you threw away your marriage for some fantasy? Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was seeing Julia again. Maybe it was 25 years of being treated like a child. But I'd had enough. Threw away my marriage? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Patricia, what marriage? You control every dollar I spend, every place I go, every person I talk to. That's not a marriage. That's ownership. Her face went white with rage. How dare you? I've given you everything. This house, security, a comfortable life. You've given me a cage, I said, and I'm done living in it. You think you can just leave me? Just walk away? Patricia's smile was cold and calculating. You signed a prenup, Lucas. You'll get nothing. Nothing. I'll make sure you're too poor and too old to start over. Maybe. But at least I'll be free. That's when she told me the truth that changed everything. About how she'd known Julia was looking for me. About the investigators she'd bribed. The false information she'd fed them. The legal connections she'd used to make sure every trail went cold. I protected our marriage, she said, like she was proud of it. I protected you from making a terrible mistake. You destroyed her life too, I realized with growing horror. You didn't just keep her away from me. You tortured her for 30 years, making her believe I didn't want to be found. I saved both of you from a fantasy that would have ruined you. I stared at my wife of 25 years. This woman I'd lived with, slept next to, shared meals with, and realized I didn't know her at all. You're sick, I said quietly. What you did, that's not love, Patricia. That's not even close to love. For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia looked genuinely hurt. 25 years of marriage, Lucas. 25 years of providing for you, taking care of you. And this is what I get? You call it providing. I call it buying compliance. I pulled Julia's business cards out of my pocket. Julia offered me a job, financial independence, the chance to be a partner instead of a possession. Patricia's face went very still. You're not taking that job. Yes, I am. No, Lucas, you're not. Her voice dropped to that dangerous, quiet tone she used when she was about to make threats. Because if you try to leave me, I will destroy you. I will tie you up in court for years. I will make sure you get nothing and no one will hire you ever again. You can try, I said, surprised by how calm I felt. But Julia has more money and better lawyers than you'll ever have. And unlike you, she doesn't need to destroy people to feel powerful. 2 weeks later, the situation with Patricia reached its breaking point. What followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, methodical, and unavoidable. A financial investigation began after irregularities connected to her law practice came to light. Questions were asked, records were reviewed, patterns emerged. I wasn't involved in any of it directly, but once the truth started to surface, there was no stopping what came next. Patricia faced serious legal consequences that ended her career and stripped away the control she had held for decades. The public story was brief. The details stayed private. What mattered to me was that the truth finally caught up. How do you feel? Julia asked, sitting beside me on the couch. Free, I said, and meant it. For the first time in 25 years, I feel completely free. 6 months later, I stood in the bridal suite at the Four Seasons, adjusting the silver tie Julia had picked out for our wedding. It was nothing like the elaborate ceremony I'd had with Patricia. No desperate attempts to impress people who didn't matter. No pretense, no performance. Just me and Julia and 50 people who genuinely cared about us, celebrating a love that had been strong enough to survive 30 years of separation. Any regrets? Julia asked during our first dance, her arms warm and sure around me. I looked down at my wife, my real wife, the woman I'd chosen with my whole heart instead of accepting out of fear, and felt the last traces of doubt fall away. Only one, I said. I regret that we lost 30 years, but I don't regret the path that led us back to each other. Without everything we went through, we might not appreciate how precious this is. As we danced under the stars on the hotel's terrace, I realized something important. Some stories don't end with the first I do. Sometimes the real story begins when you're brave enough to admit the first one was wrong and fight for what actually matters. At 56, I'd learned it's never too late to choose love over fear, partnership over control, and authentic happiness over comfortable misery. The best chapters of your life can start at any age, as long as you're willing to turn the page.